Interesting. Are you both confident that something very close to Waxman-Markey is going to pass the Congress?
I do believe that Chairman Henry Waxman has figured out how to pick the lock, and he's found the formula that can pass Congress. There's a lot of work to be done before it's on the President's desk, but I think we now have a formula that can land there.
And there have been the House passage as we speak seems nearly assured, but it's not. It hasn't occurred yet. But the Senate passage has been much more in question. But you're reasonably confident that the votes, even though you're not, the White House is not there yet, it's a doable proposition.
I think it is doable with strong support from the White House. You know, people said that it would not be possible to pass this bill out of the very conservative Energy and Commerce Committee in the House. Mm-hmm. People said it wouldn't be possible for U.S. CAP to come up, 25 companies and 5 environmental groups to come up with an agreement.
Well, people certainly said it wouldn't be possible for the guys like you to get together.
Or even for EEI. Yeah. I've heard comments that it would be hard for EEI to agree on this allocation formula. And at every stage, the historical urgency, the need for certainty, has prevailed, and I wouldn't bet against this bill in the Senate. I think it will pass.
And Tom, your sense of that?
Well, I think there is an imperative to get the job done and to move forward on climate change. I agree with Fred that we can't predict the next 50 years. So there are circumstances that I'm sure are going to get Congress back into the area of relooking this bill down the road, and I'm sure they're going to be paying attention to it, each and every year as to how it. But I think it's important for us to get the job started. We both agree on that, and I think it's important to get climate change legislation soon.
Well, our time is beginning to run short, but there are a couple of other areas I want to cover briefly. Fred, the President will be going off to Copenhagen in December to meet with other nations on a successor to the Kyoto Accord. How much difference will the passage make, and what are the prospects for getting China, India, and other nations aboard, which seems so critical?
The passage of this legislation is critical. We have to have passed it.
You think in both chambers?
Ideally in both chambers. Ideally the President would have signed it, if not at least in conference committee. Without that, we don't give the President the bona fides he needs to ask more of China and the other big emitting nations. So I think it's almost the most important thing for the United States to be able to negotiate from a standpoint of having leverage, whether this legislation or something close to it passes.
Do you foresee, the indications are already that China's going to be a very tough nut to crack on this, that they're going to hang very tough on this?
Well, I don't know, David, that I agree to that. China has done a lot of things already. Mm-hmm. They've made a lot of commitments already. I think it's reasonable, since we've put up way more of these emissions into the air, and they stay there for 100 years, so our contribution to the stock is much bigger than theirs. I think it's reasonable for them to say the United States should lead and go first. But I have confidence they will follow. I think they want to be a respected trading partner in the world community. And having said that, our Secretary of State, our President, will have to be good negotiators. But I think they will come along.
Tom, do you anticipate China is going to ask us to do more and go beyond Waxman-Markey as a price of their really making a commitment? I mean, to take care of all the junk that's in the air already?
Fred and I have talked a little bit about the China issue. I think it is since China is surpassing us, in emissions, it is a very, very important factor. And you put China and India together, and eventually they have to be part of this whole program. Otherwise, you will not solve the climate issue. And I think it is. They do have the arguments that Fred just mentioned, but I do think it is with new technologies. Hopefully, they can get on board too, and get from intensity reductions to absolute reductions, because that is going to be the key if we are really going to solve this climate issue.
That is the key.
Are there not senators who might say, I'd like to wait till after Copenhagen and see what China's willing to do
I think
before I
senators
vote for the bill?
Some senators are very, very worried about the job leakage. The jobs go overseas, that you actually get carbon leakage if they go overseas and to other countries that are not as committed to reducing emissions.
Right.
That is an issue. But I do think we've got the right balance here to get this thing started, and I think that again in the international negotiations it's going to be very important to move China and India and other developing nations into the equation as well.
Yeah, in my opinion, the Waxman-Markey bill has a combination of both carrots and potential sticks that will help America's negotiating position
On the trade side.
On the trade side.
If you
with
don't
China
do
and
this,
other
you could face
border adjustments.
Let me ask you another question. One of the things that's been surprising to me in this whole debate is that nuclear just was sort of like a silent issue. And there's 930-page bill. I think nuclear power is mentioned twice in the bill. Is that not going to be a significant part of our future now as we look at all, what our sources of non-fossil fuel?
David, you mentioned Edison Electric Institute's presidents in the United States. We represent.
Yeah, you have a background in the nuclear power.
We represent utilities all around the world. When we get together, which we recently did, the CEOs of utilities all around the world, they will say, there's no silver bullet. There's no one technology out there that can solve this issue. We need them all. But they will all agree that if we don't build more nuclear power plants that are zero carbon, there is no way we're going to meet the targets that we need to meet with global climate change.
Is the environmental community on board with that proposition?
No, I would say there's a diversity of views. Speaking just for the Environmental Defense Fund, I would say that we think global warming is so serious that we can't afford to take any technology off the table, including nuclear. We recognize that 103 nuclear power plants have operated for years without, radioactive leakage or fatalities. There's a good operating history there. We recognize that many of those plants are old and will need to be replaced. And so to really make a contribution toward carbon reductions, it would be necessary to build a few hundred new power plants. And we're not ready to say that that's a good idea until we know what's going to happen to the waste, how we deal with the very important issue of non-proliferation. But we're ready to be constructively engaged in trying to solve those problems, because if they could be solved, we would like another low-carbon technology to be available.
That wraps up our conversation today with Tom Kuhn and with Fred Krupp. Stay tuned, because we are going through one of the most historic periods this country has ever experienced on the questions of energy and environment. These energy and environmental issues have been bedeviling Washington since the early 1970s. And here we are some 40 years later, and we seem to be on the edge of a historic breakthrough. Thank you very much for joining us.